Asymmetrical Haircuts Justice Update with Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg in partnership with justiceinfo.net.
Hi, Steph.
Hi, Janet.
So, it's a week on. I'm still in The Hague. My God, get me out of here. It was the annual meeting of the International Criminal Court, and already I can see things have moved on since then.
Yeah, it's going at breakneck speed, but we need to take a moment to consider where we are now and what we think has happened and take everyone behind the scenes so that they understand what it's like to operate at the ASP and then try to get everybody a little bit up to date.
Yeah, the ASP, the Assembly of States Parties, are our big party of the year, the time that we, if you didn't see us and didn't get hold of your bags, then please contact us and we'll, if you've been on the podcast, and we'll make sure we get a bag to you. This is our present for the year. We just wanted to open it up a bit and explain to people what's happened and what it's like. But also point towards the end of the year. I'm really fed up with making podcasts. We've done a lot this year. Steph?
We need a break, honestly. And so we're going to take a quick look at what we did this year and a couple of the major podcasts we recommend, but we're also going to slow down a bit in the coming weeks. So you'll have to actually talk to your family over a Christmas dinner or holiday hikes.
Yeah, or catch up with all of the podcasts that you might have missed. So ASP, this was a strange one. It had a very strange rhythm. The budget was a minimal ask from the court, and it was basically agreed very early on. So the big issue from my point of view was the extent to which states showed real solidarity and support.
Yeah, that was a major theme, but I also thought it was odd that the budget was accepted so quickly, because usually there's a lot of wrangling, and it was accepted so quickly because it was so minimal. But as I have said before on this podcast, and I continue to hammer on, it's gotta cost the court a lot of money to deal with these sanctions things, not just because, all the things that are involved with looking at these sanctions, getting lawyers to talk about this, changing your operating system, all of this stuff takes time and money. So I read through the registrar's speech to the court, to the ASP yesterday, just to kind of see what he says.
What did he say? I mean, was it mainly about the cost of sanctions, or was it the cost of cybersecurity?
Well, he was talking about cybersecurity, and I think he also briefly mentioned kind of measures that they needed to look at, but they also have a special fund for that. So I think what happens is that a lot of those costs that the court is incurring, that they all want to put a brave face on, that the court is not really impacted by sanctions, probably all comes out of that little pocket of money, so they don't actually have to tell us how much it is, because there was a lot of support and solidarity for the court. But I also felt that everybody was kind of keeping up a brave face. It was like the Monty Python night, right? It's only a flesh wound. When you know these sanctions must be having an impact on the way the court operates.
And what the states actually said on this came out, I think there was a declaration midweek, and then there was the omnibus resolution at the end. So states actually made, I thought, quite strong commitment to say, there shouldn't be these kinds of attacks on the court, that sanctions were not right. But then in one of the paragraphs, they added a kind of a small window for, let's have a chat to those who oppose the court. Let's have a chat to non-states parties. And that caused quite a lot of discussion, I found.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty funny, because I was yesterday searching through all the declarations made at the ASP to see if I could find what each state had said individually about sanctions. But then I also made ChatGPT tell me what states said something about immunities. And I found that there's only 2 states that had a declaration that said something about immunity. And one was Serbia, which was politically very close to Russia, basically saying you should respect immunity for non-state parties for obvious reasons. But also China had a big rant about immunity.
And that wasn't at the ASP itself.
It was an observer state, and they can make declarations, apparently. So the usual suspects were for immunity. Everybody else, I guess, was more couched about it. Everybody seemed to agree that sanctions were not the answer. But there is a lot of hemming and hawing also from states.
Let's just flesh out what we mean by this. I would say the central issue is that the ICC has accepted that it has jurisdiction over the situation in Palestine. And the ICC has issued arrest warrants, including two very senior, Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who are Israeli rather than Palestinian. And there is an argument which is spouted by those who particularly dislike the way that the court operates, which has been the United States right from the start, to say the ICC should only actually have jurisdiction over the members of the court and not citizens of any state that have not actually signed up to the court.
Yeah, and that would also include Vladimir Putin, Russian president, who's also under an arrest warrant from the court. So that's why Serbia and Russia also make the same argument, but it gets a little more convoluted in some ways, where the question is if immunity for the Troika, so that's head of state, head of government, and foreign minister, should apply. And then there are some states that, after we had the court fleshed a lot of that out in the Sudan-South Africa case, where South Africa refused to arrest the Sudanese president when it was on their soil. So a lot of it has been crystallized out.
Well, let's say the ICC judges have declared what their point of view is,
right.
And a lot of people in our world would say, now that's it then, isn't it? I mean, it's now accepted. The ICC has this ability, but there's still a whole load of lawyers, as we know always with lawyers, who say, no, that is not the case.
Yes, and they also make the point that if you look at the Sudan case, where if you accept that the judges can decide for themselves what they have jurisdiction over, then in Sudan they said they had jurisdiction, but Sudan was a referral from the UN. And so if you throw it to the UN referral, then you can have this jurisdiction. But now if you have a state
like Palestine, which is an observer state even at the UN,
or even Ukraine, then in that situation, which is slightly different, if you are accepting all the jurisprudence, you can still see there's some kind of space in there, and some lawyers do, and other lawyers say no, it's obvious. So that's one of the things that people focus on.
I would say this is a set of issues that we have kind of looked at a lot in the podcast via our discussion around the Special Tribunal for Ukraine. We've really gone in depth into these issues. But as they say, this is going to run and run, isn't it? It is not over yet, this discussion. It's going to continue to come up in this context, in the sanctions context.
Yeah, and I think what is also, there's what we understand of the court, there's what lawyers understand of the court, but there's also more general perception of the court. And it's in some ways, and this is going to sound very technical, and you were already joking that this was going to be a very bro podcast where it's just two talking heads about the thing that we're into. But if you're reporting on the court and interacting with it, there are kind of two realities. There's the court as it operates, and you know all the legal ins and outs. And then there's the way how it's seen by governments, and they act not maybe on how the court really operates if you have a deep understanding of it, but their understanding of the court. And there is a question on how you engage with this and how you report on that. And
how seriously you take different statements, and whether you suggest that what one particular state has to say is truth.
Yeah, and while this week we had this Reuters report come out that I contributed to, that my colleagues put out, where they reported that the US is clearly asking for changes in the court's Rome Statute because they want to have guaranteed immunity for the President Trump and I think also the Vice President, something like that. When, as a person who follows the court, you're like, okay, yeah, that's not how this works. But then again, that's how they understand it. And that is apparently, I do believe that is what they're asking for. Even though that might be, I don't know if the word is misguided, but at least ham-fisted.
Well, I know that you say this is not how the court works. And you and I both have experience of covering these different courts and tribunals where we know that, quote unquote, not how the court works can be quite loose, in the sense that the court is constantly remaking itself. There is a guidance according to what its statute says, but there are interpretations. And we're living in a world, as I say again, of lawyers who have different perspectives. So I can always imagine how the court, even though it can't do that, it could do that, whatever that is, in order to move a situation along.
Yeah, I wonder this administration, if it would ever be enough, if it's ever short of enshrining in the Rome Statute that the court could not indict a US president, even though in a way it's not how it works. Because what we have is that there was concern over the Afghanistan investigation, and sanctions were also linked to the Afghanistan situation because they were investigating potentially US troops. A year after that investigation was opened, the prosecutor essentially said, and this was the deprioritizing, we're not looking into that, we're looking into crimes of the Taliban and ISIS-K. And so I wonder then, if that isn't enough, what will be? What formulation would the court have to do for the US to accept that it's not looking into that? And how ironclad do they want their guarantees? And what could you then put? What can you put and where should you put it if you don't put it in the Rome Statute? If they have in their head that it's got to be in the Rome Statute and it's got to be enshrined,
then we're talking about a very, 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 very high bar, because getting states to make any changes to the Rome Statute is already proving incredibly difficult for any small sensible changes like adding specific individual crimes. So let alone such a gargantuan change as that.
You would have to have a majority of states. You would have to have
not only a majority.
You have to have 80 states, I think, to even consider having this amendment. Then once you have the amendment through, then you need an even bigger majority of 7/8 of the states to approve it. Then you need also the states that don't approve and maybe would find it a reason to withdraw. You also have to give them space. All the other stuff that we've seen, amendments to the statute, have taken over a decade or are still languishing. And those are things that people agree on, like the starvation amendment is accepted, but that's not ratified. So whatever is going to happen is, if you want to do it with the Rome Statute, it's going to take at least 10 years, I think.
Yeah, it feels very pie in the sky. A couple of things that we should just mention also for context here is, to start with, the issue of membership of the court. We already know that Hungary has declared that it is withdrawing, and 3 African states who haven't yet actually withdrawn as far as I can see, but they've declared that they're going to, but we don't think that they've deposited their withdrawal. And I sent something yesterday saying Venezuela's starting the process. I have no idea where that is going, starting the process of withdrawing. It does look like the court is kind of becoming smaller.
Yeah. I think it is. This year and last year, we could kind of celebrate new members coming in. You had Armenia and Ukraine, but now we have all these countries announcing withdrawal. And yeah, I think Venezuela is just an odd duck in so many ways. I think the next year is going to be very Venezuela heavy. So
yeah, we're going to have to get our heads around it. So we'll need to develop our Venezuela context. The other sort of bit of context that I put down was sanctions, which we've already mentioned, but I wanted to mention it in terms of the feel of the ASP, sort of behind the scenes. There I was sitting, you were sitting, we kept on seeing a number of judges walking through the main area, and some of them were talking to the press. For the first time, I think, there seems to have been a fairly concerted campaign, let's say, from some of the judges, the ones who are due to be leaving in a year and a half's time, to say, I will go on the record and talk about what it's like to be sanctioned.
Yeah, absolutely. I also spoke to Judge Kimberly Pross, the Canadian judge, for a story that's coming up, but she has kind of been speaking widely in the press. There's been an Al Jazeera interview. She was on the Dutch TV last night. She's in an AP story. I think she saw that there was earlier, just before the ASP, there was an interview with a French judge in Le Monde, and that got a lot of attention. And I think the court and the judges themselves noticed how much diplomats then started to act and
engage.
Yeah,
this issue.
And Judge Prost actually told me, like, yeah, finally, when somebody explains what it's really like, then you get people, because you'd think that these diplomats know.
Well, some do know, but altogether, as a comms person as well as a journalist, I can't believe that they hadn't worked out this strategy before now, that this is how you're meant to do it. You have to actually explain things. You can't assume everybody understands what is going on. Or were they just putting their heads down, hoping it would go away, these sanctions?
I think so. This is another thing of the court trying to act like everything is as normal and these sanctions don't affect us, and don't think you can. I think maybe they see it as seeing weakness. And what Prost also said, like, all of us have spent, she said something to the gist of like, we have all spent many, many years doing human rights legislation and working, and this court is all about the victims. And I have these cases with thousands of victims that rely on me. Like, am I going to go on TV to complain that I maybe have trouble booking hotels? Like, that seems a little minor. And so I think
I do understand it on that level. I mean, you can't make it all about you, but it does humanize the court when you actually talk about the effects of something like sanctions on individuals.
What I found not funny but remarkable is that Judge Prost, who had worked in sanctions herself and had been as an ombudsman on some kind of commission, and so she had people petition to her to get rid of sanctions and then talk about how the sanctions impacted her, which are the same sanctions that she now has. And she said, people explained it, and of course I knew, and she knows better than most people, but she said, it's still one of those things that until it actually happens to you, you don't really realize how much it impacts you. She was very much insistent on, I'm not changing what I do. I still have access to the court things and all of this, I'm doing this. My court work is not suffering, but in her, like most of her free time is, I think, a lot of it is taken up by trying to figure out how to do certain things and trying to figure out if payments are going through, yes or no.
Yeah, how to travel, how to get access, how to do anything. And then these judges are all of an age where they have kids, maybe even grandkids, and then how their families are affected. And the other bit of context that we should also say, and again around the atmosphere of working at the ASP, is that there is an investigation still ongoing given out to the United Nations investigators into alleged sexual misconduct by the prosecutor, an allegation that he completely refutes. Our problem has been all the way through getting not the specifics of the investigation, because I don't believe that that's something that journalists should have personally, but some journalists get it and some don't, but access to know what the terms of reference are, to know exactly what the dates are that are going to, when we should expect things come out, exactly know what the process is going to be. And I was still amazed by the lack of information on that level.
It's completely surprising. And yeah, you get treated like some kind of salacious gutter journalist if you're wanting to know the details. But like you, I am not so much interested in the details of what's going on. I'm much more interested in the details of what did you agree and what happens then and what is the timeline for this, to have something to have a hold on. And I think the president of the Assembly of State Parties, who's kind of running this investigation, is of the idea that any information could violate the process, where I think that the terms of reference, what exactly are they looking into? Are they only looking into the alleged workplace harassment? Are they looking into wider things? Reuters has reported that they are, but we really, there's no official.
There's nothing official on
nothing
any
official,
of these things.
And
so instead of more information on that directly, there was instead a discussion about workplace culture that was important to have. I mean, we've seen the results of the staff survey, which shows how unhappy the staff is generally. Is there anything that you want to say on that and how that felt about, because you attended that event? What are the things that you noted?
I thought it was a really odd event to be at because it was the big elephant in the room. And weirdly enough, usually those side events are kind of in small rooms at the side of the general meeting, but
this was held in the big Willem Alexander room.
Yeah, this was big.
They're all named, generally everything's named after continents, rivers, mountains, but the main place is called after your king, Stephanie, Willem Alexander himself.
That was really odd because I was sitting somewhere, I used Latvia's desk.
How dare you?
Yes. Like I could pass for Latvian, but...
yeah, because everybody had to sit in the seats of the States.
Yeah, so those kind of things were odd. It was interesting, but also they had the man there who runs the internal oversight mechanism, which in the Khan investigation kind of widely believed to have dropped the ball somewhat. in not going on with it. And he was there saying how everything is like fabulous, everybody's listening. And there were these women.
He was doing his job, Steph.
I just felt it was strange. If you have these staff survey results, and if you're saying that everybody should be safe and everybody should report, these issues. I've only followed one investigation of these issues closely, which is the one into Khan. And if you look at the fact that what prompted this investigation started in May, then it took until November last year and last year is so 2024 for depending on when you're listening to it. It's been over a year with only the UN investigation.
And over 18 months.
And over 18 months. So I don't see how anybody working at the ICC as a person can look at that and say, yes, if I have trouble with what I feel is sexual harassment in my workplace, I'm going to go to the court and they're going to rapidly and effectively deal with this because
basically it's messy.
Everything is messy. Everybody's leaking, looking at what is happening there, even if your case is like less severe and maybe has less of a high profile persons involved. You could think, oh, it's taking this long because of all this high profile. You could also think that, my God, if they're doing this in such a high profile case, what would they do on a case?
So you say everybody is leaking as well, Seth. So you spending part of the ASP not catching the eyes of some of your main leakers? Or is that an indelicate question to put to a fellow journalist?
I couldn't possibly... I can neither confirm nor deny that. Obviously, I talk to a lot of people at the ICC, linked to the ICC. Some are, I think what the problem is now that I also talk to people about completely legitimate things, but because all these things kind of flow apart, I do kind of send out messages to whoever I might run into at the ASP, like, do you want me to acknowledge you if I see you in the hallway? Because if you don't, let me know. And even though that person has never told me potentially anything about something to do with the more sensitive issues, there is also an atmosphere of everybody knowing that some people are talking and who it is, and everybody looking at who may be talking to what journalist. That you don't want to give somebody, if I just say hi to somebody that I also see at like my gym, that happens to work at the ICC and is completely appropriate with me and never says anything and only ever says, I refer you to the communications office. If I start being really friendly with them, then maybe that can get them in trouble. So
I also spent some time, I think we both do, at the different side events that go on there. I mean, somebody found it quite funny that we'd said in a previous podcast that those were the highlights of the meeting. But to be honest, for me, it's a way of checking into the kind of the temperature of our world of international criminal justice, which is not only the ICC and not only these incredibly important, but only ICC-related issues to do with sanctions and investigations. There is so much going on in the rest of the world. So what were your top picks of side events? What did you most enjoy?
I have to say, and here I didn't go to a lot of side events this year. I went to the presentation of the prosecution annual report, and I went to the workplace one, and a lot of the other side events I just didn't manage. Because I was working on other stories and stuff came through. But I thought the most interesting thing was kind of the behind the scenes and also talking to the people that we know and talking to a lot of Americans who did come to the ASP, but then everybody's navigating these sanctions in a different way. And so
which panels they could join, which ones they couldn't.
Which panel they could join, which they couldn't, who is talking to who in the hallway and who is trying to avoid talking to who in the hallway. I wanted to go to some of the side events organized by the sanctioned Palestinian organizations.
Yeah, I did go to one of those, and it was really very hard to listen to exactly, again, the direct details from an organization like Al-Haq, which is gathering information both in Gaza, in the West Bank, and in East Jerusalem, and how they have lost so much access, money, communications. They're still doing their work, but yeah, it's really, really tough for them.
Yeah, and I feel that was also because I was working on several stories involving that. That was one of the big themes for me. But that also meant that a lot of the side events I just couldn't attend. But I always find it really interesting that there's all the people always handing you the flyers, and you're sitting next to people who are then you're sharing, I don't know, outlets with, because there's never enough outlets and there's no real good working space to plug in the computers. And then I just always say hi to everybody and figure out who is interested. And I'm sitting next to a lady I'm talking and I'm bringing her tea and whatever. And it turns out to be the daughter of one of the judges who is also working for something in human rights. And then the judge sits at the same table, and then another judge comes, and I'm like,
so nice to have some access. I found quite a lot of the subjects really useful just to dip into. Quite a lot of the things as we'll come to, are what we've been covering in podcasts over the year. But things like where we are on Syria, where we are on environmental crimes, where we are on the development of a new court for Gambia, where we are on the development of a Crimes Against Humanity treaty, my kind of specialist subjects because of where I'm based in Lithuania, what's going on with the Belarus investigation, and something that I keep on coming back to and will be writing on exactly what the crimes are against Ukraine's children, not only sort of transfer, maybe deportation, all of these different things, but other things that are going on. So I really enjoyed myself because, there I was, footloose and fancy free. I don't have any family here in The Hague at the moment. I can just spend hours listening to all of this stuff, but I'm quite tired. Oh, yeah.
Janet just conveniently forgot that she has a daughter based in it.
She's grown up. I don't have to cook for her anymore. So, I fed her before the ASP. I will feed her again after the ASP. But during the ASP, she knew Mum's at work.
On the note of the crimes against children, on an earlier podcast when we talked about the Ukraine Special Tribunal, we talked about that case in Sweden, I think, where it was the first time that a lower court had agreed that transferring children could be part of genocide. I saw now that I think they have also confirmed it in
the appeals.
In the appeals, so that it's now even more.
Yep, that's on my list of podcasts for next year. But let's have a quick look back at some podcasts for this year. Anything specific out of all of the many, many ones that we've made that you would recommend to people?
When I look back at what we did, I really wanted to pick out the Sudan podcast we did on sexual violence going on now. And I kept coming back to it because this year we also saw the first Darfur case at the ICC and a conviction and a judgment in that case. So
yeah, I mean, that's about stuff that happened a long time ago, but we are very conscious, both you and I, of what is going on in Sudan at the moment. And the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC keeps on saying that they're investigating with what is happening. We've heard some horrendous reports, both killings and sexual violence, and all kinds of awful things happening to civilians in Darfur over the last few months. So yeah, we're keeping an eye on that, and we want to carry on making more podcasts on that. Something I wanted to mention was that we did a whole series on special forces and Afghanistan. We particularly looked at Australia because we had access to somebody who used to be the head of special forces there. But that's a story that keeps on running.
I saw that now there is something in the UK as well with things coming out, and I think, the Netherlands said they looked into it and they haven't found anything, but all this stuff keeps coming out. I wonder if there's more that's going to pop out there, but I don't want to suggest anything. But it's obvious that this is not a closed book yet, and as more keeps coming out of Australia and the UK, then maybe other international forces will also look at what they've done.
And on Gaza, that was a constant theme during the year. I mean, there was both the actual events that have happened in places like in hospitals, the bombings of hospitals, the attacks on medical staff during the year, the attacks on graveyards even during the year, yet alone what has happened with the displacement of individuals. But the bigger question that we kept on asking out of those things with the people we were speaking to is, what does this all say about the rules of war, laws of armed conflict, LOAC or IHL, International Humanitarian Law, depending on where you are in the world and what you like to call it? I mean, it's a huge issue.
It is, and I don't think we've seen the end of it. We see now also this Gaza peace deal. Maybe they're going to try and get this case out of the ICC. We've seen the Trump administration do all kinds of weird things with the ICC and demand things that are maybe not entirely possible. So who knows what's going to come out of any negotiations on that.
Yeah, I think sort of taking it more broadly, though, I think there's a lot of questions now as to how states apply the law that seems to have been developed fairly well, both in codified in various ways and also in practice, and whether, as we see wars going on in places like Sudan and in other parts of the world, whether anybody is actually agreed that attacks on civilians are not allowed.
I'm sure we will have a lot of discussion in the coming year about what exactly is a civilian. We had this interesting podcast on the war on drugs and when something is a war. Just a sidestep from that. It was very much a case of Steph really enjoying yapping with the guests, but it has some very, very serious issues that we keep coming back to and that I think we're going to look a lot at next year.
And on Ukraine, which is, again, a question mark over negotiations, etc., we have the development of the special tribunal. In fact, there's no expectation this will actually start working for at least another few years. I understood sort of 2029 by the stage that they've actually got everything negotiated. We've focused on it a few times because it's interesting to understand what the details are, and I'm sure that will be part of our discussions. Next, you're going to something, though, for the Register of Damages and then the Claims Commission. What's that about for Ukraine?
They're going to have another round of signing things and opening things officially, and we have a register of damages, but I think is the setup or the official making official of the actual claims commission, which means you do not only register your damage, but now you can put a claim in with the commission, who will then have to decide and potentially pay out money for your claim.
And we're putting this podcast out on the Thursday, so it may already have happened.
If we're putting it out on Thursday, this is happening on the Tuesday before, so will have already been there.
What are you looking forward to for next year, Steph? What are the big issues I've put down on my list? The first one is universal jurisdiction, universal jurisdiction, universal jurisdiction. Which places are having interesting cases? Because Syria, as you already mentioned, the case in Sweden for the Yazidis. I think there are so many different interesting cases.
Yeah, Rohingya. Then we're going to have, we've heard, and I think absolutely next year will be the year of the ICJ genocide case from Gambia against Myanmar, which maybe now it's been almost 10 years since they filed it, and maybe a lot of people have forgotten the crackdown against the Rohingya. On the other hand, even if you know nothing about it, this case is going to be the blueprint for whatever happens with the Gaza, South Africa genocide case, because this is the first time in over a decade that we will have a court looking at the merits in a genocide case, and the ICJ looks very much at what it has ruled before. And we also saw that a lot of states were kind of scrambling in the last couple of years to also intervene in this Gambia-Myanmar case to give their views on genocide. I think also to position them for maybe a potential Gaza case. So this is something to definitely keep an eye on.
And just to say, we're always open to ideas. After we did our last shout out for new ideas, a couple of people got in contact to say these are subjects that they want to suggest that we should be covering. I think that we have an awful lot on our plate already, but I'm definitely sure that we need to hear from our community as to what they want.
Absolutely. More suggestions. I think other things that I can think of off the top of my head is AI technology and how you can apply it.
What's happening with the investigative mechanisms, things like the Syria, Myanmar mechanisms, in the big shortfall in budget for the UN. Are they going to be affected, or how are they working now that there's changes in places like Syria?
Maybe we should look at pre-trial work for the ICC, because
a lot of
those are
going to be the cases, aren't they?
Yeah, those are there. That's going to be everything might be pre-trial work. We might see some more suspects, which is always going to be exciting.
Ooh. So we have a lot going on. Finally, just to round up, we should give a shout out to new people who've given us support on Patreon. And we've seen an incredible steady increase in the last kind of 3 or 4 months, I would say, that we've had quite a few new people join up to give us a little bit of money for coffee, which we much appreciate. A cup of coffee every month will really keep us going. And we're going to, I think, start to be able to pay a little bit more to our hard-worked producer, who is always doing an incredible job over on Patreon. But let's say thank you to start with to Eduardo,
to Valentina R.,
to Asta Veronica,
to Emina Zoletic,
to Christoph Titecha,
Massimo Moratti,
Anna Tomjanovic,
Senna Simek,
and to Andrew Harrison. All of you, thank you so much. And some of those people have just signed up just for the newsletter, which we are really happy to have you part of our community so that we can let you know which podcasts you've been missing this month. And we also tell you what we've been reading and give you some of the articles that we've written for other places like Steph for Reuters.
So find us in all those places, and thank you very much for listening and contributing to the show.
Happy New Year, because we'll be back on in 2026.
Yeah, onwards to 2026.
This was Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast, created and presented by Janet Anderson and Stephanie Vandenberg. This episode was created in partnership with justiceinfo.net, an independent site covering justice efforts for mass violence, and with the Hague Humanity Hub. Music is by autonautics.com. You can find show notes and everything about the podcast on asymmetricalhaircuts.com. This show is available on every major podcast service, so please subscribe, give us a rating, and spread the word.